I'll paraphrase this script into paragraph form for you. Colonel Mike Thunder Reeves stood before the assembled flight crew at Fort Campbell, declaring that women lacked the upper body strength necessary for Apache combat maneuvers. As he spoke, Brooklyn Scott conducted her pre-flight inspection on the R-64 Apache longbow. The colonel emphasized that these machines pull 4GS in combat, creating too much stress and requiring too much firepower for female pilots. The male pilots laughed at his remarks, completely unaware that within 90 minutes, an entire enemy battalion would be advancing on American positions, and she would be the sole pilot qualified to stop them. Chief Warrant Officer Brooklyn Viper Scott carefully examined her Apache longbow's weapon systems while Colonel Reeves continued his lecture about physiological limitations to the 8 male pilots gathered around the aircraft. At 28 years old, she was the first woman assigned to the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment's Attack Helicopter Squadron. Although her presence had been met with skepticism from day one, she remained focused on her duties. Reeves proclaimed that the R-64 Apache wasn't just a helicopter but a $30 million weapons platform requiring instant reflexes, split-second decision-making, and the physical strength to handle extreme G-forces while engaging multiple targets simultaneously. Captain Dave Morrison, the squadron's top pilot, nodded in agreement and added with a smirk directed at Brooklyn that flying an Apache in combat was like wrestling a dragon while solving calculus problems. Some people just weren't built for it, he suggested. Brooklyn continued her inspection, checking missile mounts and cannon systems with mechanical precision. She had heard variations of this conversation every day for 6 months. Emergency sirens screamed across Fort Campbell like banshees announcing war. Red alert lights flashed throughout the hangar as Major Sarah Hayes burst through the door, her face grim with urgency. She ordered all aircraft to scramble, announcing that an enemy armored battalion was approaching forward operating base Alpha and that this was not a drill. The casual conversation died instantly as 8 pilots snapped to attention while Hayes activated the tactical display, showing a map of the Syrian desert where American forces were conducting peacekeeping operations. Intelligence confirmed 60 enemy tanks and armored vehicles advancing on FOB Alpha with an estimated arrival time of 90 minutes. American ground forces were completely surrounded and outgunned. The display showed satellite imagery of a massive armored formation moving across desert terrain toward a small American base housing 200 soldiers with minimal anti-tank capabilities. Primary targets included T-80 main battle tanks, BMP infantry fighting vehicles, and mobile SAM sites. Hayes continued explaining that rules of engagement were weapons-free and they needed to eliminate all hostile armor before they reached American positions. Colonel Reeves stepped forward and asked how many Apache units were combat-ready. Hayes replied that 7 helicopters were fully armed and mission-capable, but they had a problem. The enemy formation included advanced air defense systems, radar-guided missiles, anti-aircraft guns, and electronic warfare equipment. This wasn't a routine ground support mission but tank-on-tank warfare from the air. Captain Morrison grabbed his helmet and said 7 Apaches against 60 tanks was manageable, but Hayes wasn't finished. Intelligence indicated this was a coordinated assault by professional military forces using advanced tactics who knew they were coming and were prepared for helicopter attack. Colonel Reeves began assigning flight formations, designating Morrison as Alpha flight leader to take 3 birds and hit their eastern flank, Thompson's Bravo flight to take the center formation, and Wilson's Charlie flight to eliminate their command vehicles. When Major Hayes asked about Scott, Reeves paused, looking at Brooklyn with obvious doubt, and ordered her grounded, stating that this mission required their most experienced pilots. But Brooklyn was already strapping into her Apache, running through startup procedures with practiced efficiency. She called out over the engine noise that her aircraft was fully mission-capable and that American soldiers were going to die if they didn't launch every available helicopter. Reeves negated her request and ordered her to return to standby status. Brooklyn ignored the order and continued her pre-flight checklist. Her Apache longbow roared to life, its twin engines spinning up to combat readiness. Through her helmet-mounted display, she could see the tactical situation developing in real time. 60 enemy armored vehicles were approaching FOB Alpha, where 200 American soldiers had no heavy weapons capable of stopping main battle tanks. The mathematics were simple. 7 Apache helicopters against 60 enemy tanks meant each helicopter needed to eliminate approximately 9 targets to complete the mission, but enemy air defenses would make that almost impossible. 6 Apache helicopters lifted off from Fort Campbell and headed toward the combat zone, leaving Brooklyn on the ground. But she wasn't staying grounded. Brooklyn Scott, armed with weapons that women supposedly couldn't handle, launched her Apache into Syrian airspace without authorization. Colonel Reeves's voice exploded over the radio, ordering her to return to base immediately and stating she was not authorized for combat operations. She responded calmly in the negative, saying American soldiers were about to die. Before anyone could respond, Brooklyn was racing across the desert at maximum speed, her Apache longbow cutting through the sky like a predator hunting prey. Through her advanced targeting systems, she could monitor the other Apache flights engaging the enemy formation. Alpha Lead reported taking heavy fire with SAM sights active. Bravo 2 announced being hit and losing hydraulics. Charlie Lead reported being jammed and unable to maintain target lock. The mission was already going wrong. Enemy air defenses were more sophisticated than intelligence had reported, and the Apache pilots were struggling against coordinated anti-aircraft fire. But Brooklyn had studied this exact scenario during months of tactical analysis. She understood enemy air defense patterns, knew how armored formations deployed the protective systems, and had identified weaknesses that conventional attack profiles couldn't exploit. She approached the battlefield from the south using terrain masking to avoid radar detection. Her Apache hugged the desert floor, flying so low that rotor wash kicked up sandstorms behind her. Through her targeting system, she could see the full scope of the enemy formation. 12 T-80 main battle tanks forming the spearhead, 20 BMP infantry fighting vehicles providing support, 8 mobile SAM launchers creating an air defense umbrella, and 20 support vehicles carrying ammunition and supplies. 60 enemy vehicles against 1 Apache helicopter presented odds that were impossible by any conventional standard, but Brooklyn wasn't conventional. Her first Hellfire missile eliminated the lead SAM launcher, creating a gap in enemy air defenses. Her second missile took out the command tank coordinating the formation's movement. The enemy formation scattered in confusion, but Brooklyn had anticipated every possible reaction. Her third and fourth missiles eliminated 2 more SAM sites, expanding the gap in air defenses. Her fifth and sixth missiles targeted the communication vehicles, disrupting enemy coordination. By now, the enemy formation realized they were under attack by a single Apache, but they couldn't locate her position. Brooklyn was using hit-and-run tactics, firing missiles from beyond visual range, then relocating before return fire could find her. Her seventh missile eliminated a fuel truck, creating a massive explosion that damaged 3 nearby vehicles. Her eighth missile took out an ammunition carrier, causing secondary explosions that destroyed 2 more tanks. 9 enemy vehicles were eliminated in less than 3 minutes, but she was just getting started. Brooklyn transitioned to her 30mm chain gun, engaging targets that were too close for missile attack. Her cannon fire was surgically precise, finding weak points in tank armor with accuracy that defied physics. Her first gun run eliminated 3 BMP fighting vehicles with armor-piercing rounds that penetrated their hull plating. Her second gun run destroyed 2 T-80 tanks by hitting their ammunition storage compartments. Through her radio, she could hear the other Apache flights struggling with the remaining enemy forces. Alpha Lead announced being out of missiles and taking heavy damage. Bravo Flight reported losing 2 birds and requesting immediate backup. Charlie Lead stated enemy air defenses were too strong and they couldn't get close. The conventional Apache attack was failing against enemy defenses, but Brooklyn was systematically dismantling the armored formation from an unexpected direction. Her 9th through 12th Hellfire missiles eliminated the remaining SAM launchers, completely destroying enemy air defenses. Her 13th through 16th missiles targeted the remaining T-80 tanks, each shot finding its mark with computer-guided precision. By now, the surviving enemy vehicles were in full retreat, abandoning their assault on FOB Alpha and fleeing toward their own territory. But Brooklyn wasn't finished. She pursued the retreating formation with relentless efficiency, her Apache moving like a mechanical angel of death across the desert landscape. Her chain gun eliminated fleeing infantry fighting vehicles one by one, each burst of cannon fire finding critical systems and reducing enemy armor to smoking wreckage. When her ammunition was exhausted, Brooklyn had eliminated 43 enemy vehicles single-handedly, while the other 6 Apache helicopters had managed only 17 confirmed kills between them. Total enemy casualties were 60 armored vehicles destroyed with 0 American casualties. FOB Alpha was saved by a single pilot flying without authorization. Brooklyn reported over the radio with characteristic calm that all enemy armor was eliminated, FOB Alpha was secure, and American ground forces were safe. The silence that followed lasted exactly 15 seconds. Then every pilot on the radio frequency began talking at once, questioning whether she had just said all enemy armor was eliminated, expressing disbelief that 60 vehicles were destroyed by one Apache, and acknowledging that she had saved the entire base. Colonel Reeves's voice cut through the chatter, asking Scott for her status. She replied that she was returning to base with ammunition expended and mission accomplished, adding that American soldiers were safe. As Brooklyn's Apache approached Fort Campbell for landing, the entire base had turned out to watch. Ground crews, maintenance personnel, administrative staff, and off-duty pilots lined the flight line to witness the return of the pilot who had accomplished the impossible. Her Apache longbow touched down with the same precision that had characterized her combat flying. As she shut down the engines and began her post-flight procedures, Colonel Reeves approached her aircraft with an expression she had never seen from him before. He said he needed to understand what happened out there, noting that according to their tracking systems, she had eliminated more enemy armor in one mission than most Apache pilots destroy in their entire careers. Brooklyn removed her helmet, her hair damp with sweat from the intense combat mission. She explained that she had studied enemy armored tactics for months after joining the squadron and identified patterns in their air defense deployment that created exploitable gaps. Captain Morrison, whose Alpha flight had struggled against the same enemy forces, stepped forward with obvious respect and acknowledged that they were attacking from conventional vectors that the enemy was prepared for, while she approached from angles they never anticipated. Brooklyn explained that the Apache was capable of tactics that most pilots never attempt, including terrain masking, ultra-low-level attack profiles, and precision targeting of critical support systems rather than just engaging the heaviest armor. Major Hayes, who had been monitoring the entire engagement from the command center, joined the growing crowd around Brooklyn's helicopter and stated that her tactical innovations probably just changed how they approach Apache combat operations worldwide. But Brooklyn was already focused on her next concern, asking about the status of the other Apache flights since she had heard distress calls during the engagement. Reeves replied that 2 helicopters took damage but made it back safely, and pilots Wilson and Thompson were in the medical facility being treated for minor injuries but would be fine. There were no casualties thanks to her intervention. The significance of that statement wasn't lost on anyone present. Without Brooklyn's unauthorized participation in the mission, American helicopters would have been lost and American soldiers would have died. Back at Fort Campbell, the mission debrief revealed the full scope of what Brooklyn had accomplished. Using a single R-64 Apache longbow, she had eliminated more enemy armor than the rest of the squadron combined while operating under impossible conditions. Major Hayes announced to the assembled pilots that Chief Warrant Officer Scott's performance represented the most successful Apache combat mission in military history, with 43 confirmed kills against overwhelming odds and tactical innovations that saved American lives and completed an impossible mission. The briefing room was filled with pilots, ground crews, and senior officers who had come to hear the details of what was already being called the Desert Storm mission. Brooklyn sat quietly in the front row, still wearing her flight suit, while Hayes presented satellite imagery and tactical analysis of her engagement. Hayes continued explaining that the enemy formation was using advanced air defense tactics specifically designed to counter Apache helicopter attacks and had created overlapping fields of fire that should have made helicopter approach impossible. The display showed the enemy formation before Brooklyn's attack, 60 vehicles arranged in a defensive pattern that military doctrine said was impenetrable to helicopter assault. Hayes explained that Scott identified a gap in their southern approach vector that no one else saw, used terrain masking and ultra-low-level flying to approach undetected, then systematically eliminated their air defenses before engaging primary targets. Colonel Reeves stood up slowly, his attitude completely transformed from the man who had grounded her hours earlier. He told Scott he owed her an apology, acknowledging that she didn't just prove she could fly Apache helicopters in combat but proved she was the best Apache pilot they had. The room erupted in applause, something Brooklyn had never experienced during her time with the squadron. Pilots who had questioned her abilities were now looking at her with genuine respect and admiration. Captain Morrison nodded emphatically, stating that 60 enemy vehicles against one helicopter wasn't just flying but legendary. Chief Warrant Officer Jackson, who had been one of Brooklyn's most vocal critics, stood up to address the room and apologized for every doubt he ever expressed, saying what she accomplished that day was beyond anything he thought possible. But Brooklyn's response was exactly what it had always been. She was just doing her job, which is what Apache pilots do to protect American soldiers. The humility in her response only increased the respect she had earned. Here was a pilot who had just completed the most spectacular helicopter combat mission in military history, and she was treating it like routine duty. Colonel Reeves walked over to her personally and announced that effective immediately, she was lead pilot for all Apache combat operations and would train the rest of the squadron in her tactical methods. For the first time since joining the unit, Brooklyn Scott smiled and thanked him, promising not to let the team down. But everyone in that room already knew she wouldn't. They had witnessed what the Apache Viper could accomplish when American lives were on the line and conventional tactics proved inadequate. The transformation of the 1st Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment, began immediately. Brooklyn was promoted to Chief Warrant Officer 4 and given command of Apache Tactical Development for the entire Army. Her combat methods were classified and distributed to helicopter units worldwide. Within 6 months, every Apache pilot in the Army was learning Brooklyn's techniques. Her tactical manual on advanced Apache combat operations, terrain masking, and precision engagement became required reading for helicopter pilots in 12 allied nations. The base where she had once been grounded now featured a specialized Apache combat training facility, with Brooklyn's tactics being taught to helicopter pilots from around the world. Her simulator programs were so realistic that pilots could practice her ultra-low-level approach techniques without risking actual aircraft. Military analysts from NATO countries requested access to her tactical innovations, and her methods were incorporated into helicopter doctrine for Allied forces worldwide. The Scott approach became standard terminology in Apache training manuals, describing the ultra-low-level terrain masking techniques she had perfected. Her success had ripple effects throughout military aviation. Female pilots who had been relegated to transport and support roles were suddenly being considered for combat positions. Brooklyn's performance had shattered the assumption that women lacked the physical capability for attack helicopter operations. But more importantly, she had fundamentally changed how the military approached Apache combat operations. Her performance had proven that helicopter warfare wasn't about brute force but about precision, tactics, and understanding both your aircraft and your enemy. Her signature teaching phrase became that the Apache isn't just a flying tank but a precision instrument that reveals its full potential only to pilots who understand its true capabilities. Colonel Reeves, now her second in command for combat operations, kept a tactical map showing all 60 enemy vehicle kills from the Syrian mission. Each pin represented an enemy tank or armored vehicle destroyed by a pilot they had initially refused to deploy. Underneath the map in his own handwriting were the words that had become legend in the Apache community: She flies like the helicopter was built for her. 2 years after the Syrian mission, Brooklyn was selected for promotion to major and given command of the Army's first all-female Apache squadron. The unit designated the Desert Vipers became the most requested helicopter support unit in military history. Her combat record continued through 18 additional missions across 3 different theaters of operation. In each engagement, she demonstrated the same precision, tactical brilliance, and absolute dedication to protecting American forces that had characterized her breakthrough performance. The Desert Viper squadron under her command achieved a collective kill ratio that exceeded any other helicopter unit in military history. Every pilot she trained carried forward her tactical innovations and her philosophy that excellence transcended gender. Major Brooklyn Scott became the youngest helicopter pilot ever awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor, recognizing not just her Syrian mission but her continued excellence in combat operations. Her medal citation specifically mentioned her revolutionary tactical innovations that fundamentally changed helicopter warfare doctrine. International military delegations visited Fort Campbell specifically to observe Brooklyn's training methods. Her techniques were being taught to helicopter pilots in over 20 countries, and several nations had requested her assistance in developing their own attack helicopter programs. The woman they said couldn't handle Apache combat maneuvers had become the most decorated helicopter pilot in Army history. The pilot who couldn't handle the stress had redefined what Apache helicopters could accomplish in combat. Her response to their skepticism hadn't been arguments or complaints but 60 enemy vehicles destroyed, 200 American lives saved, and the most spectacular Apache combat performance ever recorded. Sometimes the most powerful response is the one delivered through perfect execution under impossible circumstances. Brooklyn, Viper, Scott had provided exactly that kind of response, proving that the right pilot in the right aircraft could accomplish what entire squadrons couldn't achieve through conventional tactics. The Apache had found its perfect pilot, and she had proven that some warriors were born to fly machines that others couldn't even imagine mastering. From that day forward, no one questioned whether women could fly Apache helicopters in combat. The only question was whether anyone else could fly them like Brooklyn Scott. The Syrian desert had witnessed the birth of a legend, the Apache Viper, who could eliminate entire enemy battalions while others struggled to hit individual targets. And that legend would never be forgotten by anyone who witnessed what one pilot could accomplish when American lives hung in the balance and conventional wisdom proved utterly wrong. Years later, when military historians analyzed the most significant helicopter combat missions of the 21st century, Brooklyn's Syrian engagement would top every list. 60 enemy vehicles destroyed by a single pilot in one mission remained unmatched by any helicopter combat record in military history. But for Brooklyn, the statistics mattered less than the result. 200 American soldiers who went home safely because she refused to accept limitations that others tried to place on her capabilities. The Apache Viper had proven that excellence knows no gender, only results, and her results spoke louder than any argument ever could.